Today's video is a good one, and it's all about phantom drain on the Tesla Model 3. For those that don't know what phantom drain is, it's the amount of energy your Tesla uses stood absolutely still doing nothing. And it may surprise you just how much energy your Model 3 uses while stationary. I've just got COVID, so neither myself or my Tesla Model 3 are going anywhere for the next 10 days, which gives me perfect time to assess the phantom drain in it. And I'll also work out how much it costs you a year to park up your Model 3, let alone drive it anywhere. So I made a video a while back called 5 Things I Wish I Knew Before I Bought My Tesla. And one thing I mentioned was about phantom drain. I didn't realise that if I parked my Model 3 at an airport for a week, I'd have to worry about how much battery I left it with to factor in how much it was going to lose while stood still while I was laying on the beach. I thought this was commonplace for electric cars and made a comment along those lines, but thankfully my viewers educated me otherwise, and it turns out this is pretty much a unique problem for Tesla, at least in the amount it loses, that is. So I'm going to look at other EV manufacturers as well, because it turns out the amount of phantom drain they have varies quite drastically, and also try and figure out why there's phantom drain in the first place. But even if Tesla are really bad for phantom drain, apart from the inconvenience of having to work this out when you're parking it up not plugged into a charger for a while, is it really going to cost you anything? I can hear the petrol head saying already, my car doesn't cost me anything to park up on the drive. No, but it costs you a fortune to put petrol in it. And don't even get me started on the maintenance costs. Anyway, I'll be working out how much it costs you to park up your Model 3 for a year, even if you don't drive it anywhere. So coming back to phantom drain on the Tesla, is this something Tesla are aware of? And are they doing anything about it? Well, they're definitely aware of it, because this is the manual, and it goes some way to explaining where the energy is being used. It says if left idle or unplugged, the vehicle periodically uses the battery to do system checks or charge the 12-volt battery as required. It goes on to give us an estimate of how much we can expect to lose. Tesla suggests you can lose up to 1% per day, but that could vary. And then goes on to give us an example. If we parked at the airport for 14 days, we could unsurprisingly expect to lose 14%. Tesla clearly have a low expectations of our maths abilities doing the sum 14 times 1 for us, but cheers anyway. Now that's obviously going to vary depending on your battery size. I've got the standard range plus, so that's probably about a 50 kilowatt hour battery. So Tesla reckon I'll lose about 500 watt hours per day. But we're going to find that out. Have Tesla overestimated? Are they underestimating, or are they bang on? That's what this experiment will find out, because I'll be measuring discharge every day. That sounds wrong. So we have a rough estimate of 500 watt hours per day for your Tesla, maybe more if it's 1% of the biggie battery packs, but let's work on the best case scenario. So what about all the other EVs? Well, I went to my trusted resource of Google and downloaded as many manuals of other EV manufacturers I could find, because I thought Tesla clearly mentioned it in their manual, do the other manufacturers. I looked at the Hyundai Ioniq, the Jaguar I-Pace, Ford Mach-E, the Volkswagen ID range, Nissan Leaf, Polestar. I looked at all their manuals and none of them mentioned phantom drain as openly as the Tesla. I have to admit though, I didn't read all the manuals. I just had to search for battery, discharge, long and period. And I also didn't look through all 335 references the Nissan Leaf manual had to the word battery. The only one that kind of hinted at it a little bit was the Volkswagen, but it basically said if you leave your Volkswagen unplugged for several months, then you can expect a bit of discharge. That sounds to me like leaving it at the airport for a couple of weeks isn't anything to worry about. The other one that made reference to it was the Polestar, that said that if you leave it for long periods, which it classed as over a month, you should leave it plugged in and have a state of charge of 40 to 50%, which suggests to me it has maybe a similar phantom drain to the Tesla Model 3. So other brands appear not to have any phantom drain according to their manuals, or maybe they're just not as honest and open as Tesla are. To find out whether this is a reality, I've been looking at fellow YouTubers' videos to find out what their EV phantom drain's like, and it turns out at least one manufacturer needs to be a little more honest and open. But before we look at the phantom drain in other EVs, is the phantom drain that Tesla estimate anything to worry about anyway? If we go off the 500 watt hours per day rate and work out that you charge your Model 3 on the cheap 5p tariff overnight, that's only going to work out as £9 a year. If you then compare that to the average household tariff, that's £35 a year. And even if you charge it on expensive public charges, that's £100 a year, which to be fair is starting to add up a little bit. How about those that bought it for an environmental reason though, because you're effectively leaving a massive light bulb on day or night? I'll be looking at the environmental costs as well. So far, this is all theory though. What is reality like? What is my Tesla Model 3's actual battery usage while stood still? Well, I've used the Teslax app, which connects via Bluetooth to my diagnostic device plugged into my Model 3, and that's going to give us accurate measurements down to the 100 watt hours, which is better than using the percentage bar because that can sometimes be inaccurate as things change. It was 9 degrees throughout the entire test. It didn't fluctuate massively, so it wasn't super hot, wasn't super cold, typical UK weather really, grey and overcast and not very exciting. And I didn't open the Tesla app once to keep the Tesla in a deep sleep mode, pretty much how I was with COVID. Our starting point was 40.2 kilowatt hours, and the Model 3 wasn't plugged in at all, so it wasn't drawing additional power for recharging and system checks from that point of view. I also turned off the Wi-Fi, so that would simulate what it's like being parked in an airport car park for 10 days using its LTE connection. And one thing you might need to consider in a hot climate, we don't need to worry about that in the UK, is that if you have cabin overheat turned on, it's going to intermittently turn on the aircon to keep the cabin under a certain temperature. So that's clearly going to use a lot more battery while you're parked up, but that's not going to happen in my garage. So how did fellow YouTubers get on with Phantom Drain and their EVs? Well, one had an ID4, left parked for 4 days and only lost 0.5%. Then there was a Nissan Leaf that was left for 14 days and didn't lose anything. An MG that pretty much did similar. And then looking at the comments on my video that I talked about earlier, you had BMW owners, Hyundai owners, Renault owners, all saying the same thing. They didn't really suffer any phantom drain over long periods of time. Even the Porsche Taycan only lost 1.3 watt hours per day. That's like 500 times less than the Tesla. Now you may have noticed that I left one significant EV off that little list I was talking about. Yes, you've guessed it, it's the Polestar. And according to YouTuber Bjorn, that equally suffers with phantom drain. Now, if you haven't seen his videos, I'll put a link to them at the end. He does some really awesome stuff, so make sure you follow him. But before we get on to how much phantom drain the Polestar has, let's have a look at how the Tesla's getting on so we've got something to compare it to. So on day 5, exactly 120 hours after I left it, I remeasured the battery and it was now at 39.1 kilowatt hours, which meant we've used 1.1 kilowatt hours. If you spread that out over the 120 hours, that works out as a power use of 9 watts, which is exactly the same as using an LED light bulb in your house. But I think we forget how efficient LED light bulbs are nowadays, because there's loads of other stuff you leave on all the time that has similar power drain. So for example, my router, on all the time, 5 watts. If you look at my fridge, it's 30 to 40 watts, which is 3 to 4 times more than my Tesla. So at 1.1 kilowatt hours spread over 120 hours, that works out as 225 watt hours per day, way less than the 500 watt hours per day that Tesla estimated. But will that continue for the next 4 days? Because it might be that there's now power drain to charge the 12 volt battery as Tesla suggested. So we might get a much higher rate on the last leg, which will then average out a lot higher over the time period and maybe hit that 500 watt hours per day that Tesla predicted. We'll find out where we're at in 4 days. Now we've got some context then, what did Bjorn find out about the Polestar? Well, he measured it and found on average over 4 days that it lost 364 watt hours per day, or 0.5% of its battery. But I always prefer to work in watt hours per day because that gives it more context, especially if you've got different battery sizes. So that explains why Polestar have said if you leave it for a long period, which they class over a month, you want to leave it with a state of charge between 40 and 50%. So let's say the worst EVs in the world are Tesla and Polestar for phantom drain. Is that still going to have a significant impact on the environment? Obviously, wasting electricity is bad, but if you produce electricity from a green source, let's say wind, you produce 21 grams of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere for every kilowatt hour of electricity you use. If it's gas, it's 595 grams. So quick sums, on Tesla's 500 watt hours per day estimate, that'd be 182 kilowatt hours of electricity you waste per year while stood absolutely still, which equates to about 3.8 kilograms of CO2 released into the atmosphere that's wasted. Well, if you burn 1 litre of petrol, that actually releases 3 kilograms of CO2. And I know people that put 50 litres of petrol in their car a week. So effectively, phantom drain for an entire year produces the same amount of CO2 as burning 1 litre of fuel. Yes, in an ideal world, phantom drain and wasting electricity wouldn't be a thing, but when you compare it to the combustion alternative, EVs are still way better for the environment. In fact, I've done a whole video on this, which you can have a look at. I'll put a link in the description. I'll sum up the financial cost at the end once we know the true figure of the phantom drain on the Model 3. So that's it. The Tesla has been untouched for 187 hours or about 8 days. What are the final numbers saying? Well, the battery at the end of the experiment is reading 38.3 kilowatt hours, and we started with 40.2. So that means we've used 1.9 kilowatt hours over the 187 hours, which works out as a power use of about 10 watts. The second part actually averaged 11.76 watts, and I'm not quite sure why that was a lot higher, because you remember the first part was 9 watts. Maybe it was charging the 12 watt battery, I don't know. Overall then, that works out as 243 watt hours per day, which is way better than Tesla estimated it to be. It may just be that they've made improvements over the air and that's not been reflected in the manual yet. Before I left my Model 3 plugged in all the time, I'd say that 1% was actually pretty accurate, but I haven't done that for almost 2 years now, so I think they've made over the air software updates. That means you lose 1 mile of range a day, and it's going to cost you £4.43 a year if you charge on the cheap electricity rate. As to why Tesla have more phantom drain than other EV manufacturers, I don't know, but it alluded to it in the manual that it keeps the 12-volt battery in shape and does lots of system checks. So I'm quite happy to take a hit with phantom drain if it keeps my Model 3 working at its optimal, and just plan ahead when I'm at an airport. That's it for now. I hope you found that fun and interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, because that really helps the video and the channel get seen by more people and is very much appreciated by me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. If you want to quickly switch between the percentage and the miles left in the app, simply tap the number next to the battery.